What's going on, YouTubers? It's a MOPAR Man 1978 here. Today I got some more done on the wiper blade pivot housing assemblies, the gaskets and all that. I'm going to show you what I did. Okay, so basically I did a little overkill on this. What I did was on the back side of this foam gasket, I put a layer of extreme cold, extreme high temp clear silicone seal on the back, and I let that sit overnight, even though you're supposed to let it sit for 24 hours anyway. I want to make sure that's got a good seal on the back of it, and this foam won't move around. And then so today I was able to finally find the grease gun that's got the high grade silicone grease in it only, and I went ahead and greased the inside of the housings through the grease zerks. And what I did is I pumped it a couple times in there, and then what I did is I rotated the pivot housing assemblies, and then I went ahead and gave it a couple more squirts internally, and it's you could actually start to see up where the shaft comes up out of the housing. You could it was starting to sweat a little silicone there and on the bottom, so everything's gotten worked away all the way around inside there. Make sure, so that's good. Tech tip: when you're doing these foam front seals that goes around the top, towards the top of the pivot shaft, it used to say, let's see here, said to use one of these 3/8 3-inch long extensions to slide the seal over the top of this, and so it expands the inner diameter of that foam seal, that round seal right here. Well, if you've never done this before, it becomes a real pain in the ass. What I did is I put a little bit of silicone grease on the inside and around the outside, so to make it more pliable. They say to use like dish soap, but that's just a mess. And I think Dawn has, if you use like especially Dawn, it has a chemical that helps break down petroleum products. And what do you think foam's made out of? Petroleum products. So I don't use soap of any kind. I think it eventually will break down the foam seal. So I use the silicone grease, which will not affect the seal. And so I start off with this to expand it, but you're never really going to get it over the top of this piece that the wiper blade slides down on it and attaches to. So to get this there to help get it started, but to actually expand that middle, I used some silicone grease on the end of this 1/2-inch extension. You can use any 1/2-inch drive extension, but I just happen to have this one to give you more something else to hold on to while you're fitting that seal over the end of this. And then I put some silicone grease on there, and then what I did is I just slid it on there and then let it sit on this section here so it really expanded. And I let it sit on there for a good 5-10 minutes, and that way it gives the chance the foam to expand without possibly tearing it. And then what I did is, as soon as I took it off, you have to take that seal and come in at the bottom of the seal in the hole at a slight angle and work your way over the top of the head of this pivot shaft. It's kind of like what you do with when you're putting a tire back on a rim, so to speak. So anyway, you get that on there, and I did put some silicone grease on this before, and so I just slid it down over there and got it down nice and tight. Turn the light on. Now we got some cloud cover, so it's kind of making it, as you can see, it's right up against the housing, and I made sure I pressed it all the way down real good. And then what I did is I came back in here with some more silicone grease and greased all the way around the base of that between the gasket and the housing. And then I came up here and did the same thing. And I put grease on the pivot shaft before I slid the gasket down, the seal down over the top of that as well. And then a little bit more on the top. And then what you got to do is you got to wipe these threads off before you install the wiper blade. But anyway, then what I did was I showed you in the kit. It comes with them 2 little strips of tar seal strips that's wrapped on both sides with wax paper. Well, that wax paper is very thin and not the best of quality like you would get for like baking. So you have to be real careful and start to peel the outer sides off and work your way around. Mine ended up, I had to basically take an X-Acto blade and peel a really thin layer of tar off with the paper. But basically I got two little tall wads of I got 1 wad of tar off there, and then what I did is I mixed it together. I kneaded it together with my fingers to create one big one, and then I pinched it in half and split the piece up. And then what I did is make sure on this you don't get any silicone grease around the base of this and on the foam here. And then what I did is knead this out into what looks like a worm. I would say maybe as thick as the outer diameter of a wooden pencil, the part that's painted yellow. And then I basically wrapped it around the base between the housing base and the foam there, and all the way around. And then I overlapped it and then kind of started pushing it down a little bit. But you got to make sure you leave enough on the base here and over here, and then that way once it comes in through the sheet metal, it seals up on both the base of this housing and at the base on this foam seal, so it creates an airtight seal. Anyway, I got this one to do, but let me show you what I got done so far. And then what I did was once I got that on there, I was real careful and I put some more silicone seal, not the grease, on all this, and then just around the edge of that tar seal. And then came in, I got the light on underneath here, so I'll try not to cast a shadow too much. There we go. And that's what happens. You slowly tighten each side down, taking turns going back and forth, and see where I made my lines. Make sure when I first took it off that it lines up, and then make sure this is down towards the floor. You don't want up here. After you tighten that up, you'll have it stuck on this sheet metal lip up here and you won't be able to get it off, and you'll have to start all over again. Anyway, when I got this all tightened down to where the bolts couldn't tie it anymore, I went along here and pressed on this silicone seal and the tar, and pressed it up against all this, and on the other side too. So now this has all been taken care of, and then it's just waiting for the other half of the pivot assembly and the pivot arms to be reinstalled. So just wanted to show you that. Okay, here's like what I'm talking about. And then what you're going to do is knead that out long enough so you can wrap it around the base here, and then so it has just enough to overlap on itself, and then I'll show you when I get done with this. Okay, here's the finished results. See how it's at an angle, kind of like a panhead bolt or whatever you want to call it, so it mounts flush. It's wide at the top and then starts to kind of taper off towards the bottom. Anyway, when you put it up there and you tighten the bolts down, this was that sheet metal hole, that edge of that hole is going to come down and scrape this housing shaft here down, and it's going to create a tight seal. Make sure your hands and your fingers are clean of any grease, oils, anything like that. And then let's go install this and I'll show you. Okay, one last thing I wanted to let you know about is, give me a minute here. Once you get this seal on that goes on the pivot shaft, between the pivot shaft housing and the cowl right there, once you get that up underneath that assembly up underneath the dash and ready for reinstalling, one thing you're going to have to do, okay, this is just for demonstration purposes. So anyway, once you have that on that pivot shaft housing assembly and you're up underneath the dash, and this part, if you look up underneath the dash, there's going to be a flat panel with a perfectly round little hole cut out. This seal has to go through that hole, and that's why I told you earlier in the video to make sure all this is greased up really good with silicone grease. Do not use soap. I know they say to do that, but anyway, I know I'm repeating myself, but this makes it a lot easier. Maybe a little bit messy, but that's what microfiber cloths are for, or whatever you want to use, whatever cloth. Anyway, this is also for demonstration purposes. This is, when you look underneath the dash, you're going to see a hole just like this. So what you have to do here, you have to come in at an angle a little bit and start to feed it in like that. And then on this side, while you got pressure on it, you're going to have to use both hands and either your finger or maybe a straight edge screwdriver or something that's not sharp that's going to cut or rip into this seal. And then what you're going to do is you're going to basically do like this. See how it's going in? That's what it's got to do. And then you leave it like that, and then you get your I use the 1/2-inch wrench and a short, here, I don't have it out here, I got two different ones out here. Okay, so I use basically a short, I had a cheap made in Taiwan short 1/2-inch wrench, because it's tight spaces up in there. Even though if you got a lot of that stuff moved out of the way, you still got wiring and brackets and other stuff up in there. And then I used a short 1/4-inch ratchet, and this is, I think, like a 3 or 3.5-inch extension, and then a 1/2-inch socket, 1/4-inch drive. You get the assembly up in there, up against that plate, that sheet metal plate. Just get the bolts started, and then you might have to come in at an angle with this, or another angle, or maybe you might have to use the open part of the wrench to go for a little bit. Anyway, you get it all done, get it all real tight to where you can't move that bolt anymore on each side. But like I said, you take turns going back and forth till you get it all tightened up, and that's for both sides. So, without further ado, as you can see, there's still some, see that glossiness? That's silicone grease, 100% super lube silicone grease still impregnated into that seal. And on the back side of that seal, there's a better shot. It ain't going anywhere. So it's all up in there nice and tight. Okay. Okay, so there is a thick nylon washer that goes back here. It's kind of oddly shaped, but it's somewhat round. It fits on the back side. Locks into this little bent out lip here. That goes on first, then this goes on, and then there's a flat plate. That's our real flat washer. And then this is a special little clip. You got to start on this side, press down, and then slide forward until this piece locks on the other side, so it's not going anywhere. And that's that. And let me get up in here. These Plymouths, I haven't seen my dart yet because I got to do this on my dart, but they use a combination of nylon washers and a hard fiber washer as a spacer in here. Just make sure all these joints are greased up with like some 3-in-1 oil or something. Let's see here. As you can see, that one's up in there too. I didn't disassemble that one. I kept most of that together. That might be made it a little bit more of a pain in the butt, but it's all together once you install it. And I got the key to the accessories on side, not the so I don't burn up the points. So if you've done it correctly, as you can tell, these joints here need to be oiled. I got some 3-in-1 oil to oil them. They're a little dry. But other than that, this is all was left to complete the series on disassembling or removing, disassembling, and installing the new seal kit and reinstalling it. And so anyway, hopefully you enjoyed this video. Stay tuned for more.